Hello, and welcome to Title Talk in Real Estate in New York. I'm Brenda Posner from Langdon Title, and today we have Laura Cowan with us. So, Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So thank you for having me. I'm Laura Cowan, and I'm the founder of the Law Office of Laura Cowan, which is a trust and estates and also business law firm in New York City. And we're based in Midtown Manhattan. My firm is about 5 years old now. And so we practice business law, working with small business owners, but also estate planning, which I think is what we're talking about today. So that's a little bit of my background. I'm a former CPA. I worked for many years for hedge funds, and I was at Ernst & Young for a while, Goldman Sachs for a while. And I went to law school and worked for a few years before opening my own firm at the end of 2016.
Very nice. A lot of experience there. That's great.
Yes.
So tell us, what is estate planning for people that don't know?
Yeah, so estate planning is basically planning for what is going to happen to your money and your family and your health care in the event of your death or incapacity. So it's not just about planning for what happens to my money when I pass away. That's part of it, but it's also about planning for who can make decisions for you in the event that you're incapacitated. Who can make healthcare decisions for you, who can manage your finances and your assets and things like that. That's a big part of it. And then, of course, it is also about who gets what when you pass away, but also under what circumstances. So most people tend to think, like, if you haven't done any estate planning, if you don't have a will, that you don't have a will, but you really do. We all have a will. It's just that the state of New York has written it for us. So in other words, if you haven't actually gone out and done a will or a trust, you've got a built-in estate plan. That is the state of New York's laws about what happens to someone's money and property when they pass away without any estate planning documents in place. So this is the default plan. That's what I like to call it. We all have the default plan. And estate planning is really about overriding the default plan, so that you can get in writing what you want to happen and not just let the state of New York decide for you.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I say, what will happen, I mean things like, if you've got minor children, who's going to take care of your minor kids? That's a big piece of estate planning for people who have minor kids at home. And the planning that you do, it just varies based on where you are in life. So someone who's a young parent, has young kids at home, their main focus is going to be, well, who's going to take care of my kids if something happens to me? And then someone a little bit later in life, they might be thinking about, okay, how do I apply for Medicare? How do I apply for Medicaid? How do I deal with end of life planning? So estate planning is not just something that you do once and then never think about again. The documents that you have in place when you're in your 30s are going to be very different from the documents that you have in place when you're in your 60s or 70s. But it's definitely something that everyone needs to do, which is a question that I get very often. I hear very often either, I'm single, I don't have any kids. Do I need to do an estate plan? I don't have very much money. That's another one. And I guess the short answer is what I really think estate planning is about is making things as easy and inexpensive as possible on the people that you care about when you're gone. And without these documents in place, you're certainly going to have to deal with a probate court, which is something that you would want to avoid. And then your wishes just may not happen if you don't have everything down in writing. And a really good example of this is a woman that I actually just did a will for in November of this year, who unexpectedly passed away in December. Completely unexpected, was not sick or anything when I met with her. And she signed her documents and she signed a will, and we're going through all of that now. But one of the things that I mentioned to her family when I was speaking to them just today actually was that she had very specific instructions about what she wanted to have happen to her ashes. And in specific, she wanted to be cremated and to have her ashes sprinkled from a hot air balloon, right? So everyone has got different ideas. Some people are like, I don't care what you do. Other people are like, no, I want this to happen. And I remember she had very specific wishes about where her ashes were sprinkled. And I told this to her family, and they had no idea that's what she wanted. And they were so grateful that I told them that, and that I had this documentation that showed this is what she would have wanted. And they were like, we would have never known that's what she wanted, but we can definitely do that. And that made me so happy that they were going to follow her wishes. So that's estate planning in a nutshell.
Okay, so now that you mentioned a will, what is a will versus a trust?
Yeah, so when most people think of estate planning, or when they think of I need to get my affairs in order, they think I need a will. And that's because that's what we've all heard, growing up. And wills are good. There are certain things you can do with a will. You name beneficiaries for your assets in a will, and you can name an executor. This is a person who oversees everything after you're gone. If you have minor kids, you name guardians for your minor kids in a will. So those are the things that a will does. It's about all that a will does. So a will doesn't actually accomplish very much when we look at some of the other things that people care about. And a big downside of a will is that it needs to go through probate court. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize. They think, well, if I have a will, isn't that the whole point of having a will? So I don't have to deal with the court and probate and all of that. It's the exact opposite. If you pass away with the will, it needs to get filed down at the probate court in your county. And then it's got to go through a whole process before all of your money can be distributed. And that process, the probate process, is expensive. It usually eats up a pretty big portion of the estate. And it takes a long time, and it's a public process, right? So in other words, when you pass away, your will becomes a public document, which really surprises people as well. So if you don't like the idea of people knowing what your will says, then a better idea is to do something called a living trust. And this is something that the vast majority of my clients choose when I counsel them on the pros and cons of a will versus a trust. People tend to shy away from doing a trust because they tend to think it's for rich people and it sounds fancy. And I often hear, I don't need a trust. But what I found is that after I've spoken to my clients about, okay, well, these are the downsides of probate, and this is how things would play out if you went with the will route. And then with the living trust, which is a will substitute, it has the benefit of not having to go through probate when you pass away. So all of those downsides that come with probate, you avoid. And then there's some other things you can do with a trust. Like, for example, if you don't want your kids getting a big check on their 18th birthday, maybe you want them getting it staggered or only after they've graduated college or something like that. You can put rules in a trust that you can't put in a will. All you can do with a will is just name beneficiaries, and that's it. If you want to have any instructions in place, you need to do a trust. So that's the main difference between the two. And what I usually do with my clients when they come in is I write all of their assets out on the whiteboard, or now it's on the computer via Zoom. And I look at, how expensive probate would be if all of these assets that they have to go through probate. It usually totals between 1% and 7% of all of your assets when you add them all up. So that's a big chunk of the estate that's being lost just to probate this will that you have that says everything goes down to my spouse and then to my kids. And then we talk about a trust and how that will avoid probate. And then there's some other benefits of a trust as well. And 9 times out of 10, my clients go with a trust.
Okay. So what things should people look for when they're hiring an estate planning attorney?
So you want to find someone who practices in your state. This is something that's state specific. So if you live in California, you want to work with a California attorney. That's a question I get a lot. It's the first thing I ask when someone calls in my office is, do you live in New York? Because people just don't realize that you have to work with a lawyer who lives in your state. And I would look for an attorney who educates. I think education is a big part of the process. I know this having sat through hundreds of client consultations. Most people tend to come in with a certain set of facts and knowledge, and And oftentimes by the end of the meeting, they're thinking about things very differently because they just don't realize a lot of the things that I just spoke to you about. So having an attorney who explains your options, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, as opposed to just saying, well, you don't need this, or, you don't need that, or, that's not my approach. I think it's better to find a lawyer who says, well, these are your different options and these are the pros and the cons. And to base your estate plan based on what you're trying to accomplish. So if I ask, is probate avoidance important to you? Yes or no? Sometimes people say no, and then a will is fine. Or I'll say, is it important for your kids to get their inheritance a little bit later in life? If they say yes to those things, then I'll say, okay, well, we can solve these problems using a trust, but not a will. And they say, great. So then we just get past that. Oh, I don't need a trust. So an attorney who educates you on your options, look for an attorney who charges a flat fee. This is an area of law where it's pretty easy to charge a flat fee as opposed to billing by the hour. So you can imagine if you're doing like litigation or something, well, you have no idea how long that's going to take. So that lawyers usually bill by the hour, but estate planning, it's pretty easy to quote a flat fee and then say these are the documents that you're going to get for that flat fee. And then you know exactly what you're going to be investing and how much it's going to cost. I would find an attorney who has systems in place to keep in touch with you, because a will, as I said prior, a will that you have in place today is probably not going to reflect your life 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Even if your life hasn't changed that much, the laws may have changed. So you've got the estate tax laws and other laws that are all part of your estate plan. So you want to work with an attorney who's going to keep in touch. I reach out to my clients once a year just to check in and see, have there been any major life changes that might warrant an update to your documents? So those would be the things I would think about. A lawyer who works in your state, one who takes the time to educate. One of my favorite things to do is webinars. Used to be in-person seminars, but I offer a lot of estate planning webinars just so people can start to understand some of the concepts before, without having to pay to come in for a consultation. So an attorney who educates, one who charges flat fees, and one who will keep in touch with you as time goes on.
That sounds like really good advice. I feel like I learned so much already here today. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us. And
you're welcome. Happy to be here.
And please, like I always say, consider us a resource for anything you need real estate in New York. Thank you so much.